be chimpanzee. Come on. 1, 2, 3, chimpanzee.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Avner. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, JGI, Jane Goodall Institute team, which I think we should introduce Jane Lawton, who's the Executive Director. Avner, you met over there. And who else is here? Alec? Who else? Anyone else?
Camellia.
Camellia. Yes, Camellia. And all of you. Hopefully soon you'll be joined on to us in some way or other through Roots and Shoots. The first thing I'm going to do is to kind of bring some life into here, some fun. So I'm going to give you a greeting you won't have heard before, and you're going to listen very carefully because then we're all going to do it together. And this is the greeting that you would hear if you came with me to Gombe National Park and climbed up the hills in the morning. To me, it's one of the most magic sounds of the African forest. It's the greeting call of the wild chimpanzee. So listen to it, and it's called a pant hoot because it's ooh, ah, ooh, ah, and people get that wrong. When they try and imitate it, they go ooh, 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 and that's not right. It sounds stupid, like a gibbon. Gibbons sound wonderful, but they don't sound like chimps. So here's the greeting call. Now we do it together, right? Come on. Right, good, well done. So indeed, chimpanzees are so like us. And you know, when I first went out and studied the chimpanzees, and I went back and I had to go to Cambridge University to get a degree, and I got back and I was so excited. I hadn't been to college at that point. And my mentor, Lewis Leakey, told me I had to get a degree and there wasn't time for a BA, so I'd have to go straight for a PhD. That sounds funny, doesn't it? But anyway, that's what happened. But when I got to Cambridge, I was a bit scared. I mean, you know, I'd never been to college, and Cambridge in England is the sort of top science university. And all the professors told me I'd done everything wrong. They told me that I shouldn't have given the chimpanzees names. Now, any of you who know anything about the Gombe chimpanzee study, you've probably heard of Flo. You may have heard of David Greybeard, I see nodding heads, and Fifi and Goliath. Well, no, I shouldn't have given them names. That was not scientific, I was told. And I absolutely couldn't talk about all those vivid personalities. And if you've read any of the articles or books, you know how different they all are, just like we are. And they said, you can't talk about them having minds. And you certainly can't talk about them having the ability to think. Well, it's so obvious when you watch chimpanzees in the wild that they can think. And for example, I discovered early on in the study, which was very exciting, that after all, human beings aren't the only ones who can use and make tools. And I saw the chimpanzee who had first started to lose his fear of me, and I named him David Greybeard, and I bet many of you have heard that name with his beautiful white beard. And I saw him picking pieces of grass and pushing them down into the termite mound and picking off the insects. And then I saw him picking a leafy twig and stripping the leaves. That's modifying an object. That's the beginning of tool making. And it was very exciting. In fact, the chimpanzees of Gombe use other objects as tools, mostly for eating, but leaves to wipe themselves, and scrumpled leaves to get water from a hollow in a tree, and so forth. And of course we know today that all over Africa, wherever chimps have been studied, they show completely different tool-using behaviors. And these are learned by the young ones observing the adults. But anyway, I'd just seen this first tool using, and you tell me what this animal could be doing if he wasn't thinking. David Greybeard is lying asleep. He's very nicely asleep in the middle of the day. And then he's by himself, like chimps often are. And he sits up and he sort of thoughtfully scratches his arm. And he looks around. And then he sets off and he walks along a trail for a few steps. And then he stops and he picks some carefully selected pieces of grass, not just a handful of grass, but looking through this clump and picking one here and then another one there. Then he puts those 5 tools in the neck, we call it the neck pocket, between shoulder and chin. And he walks for about another 10 minutes to a place that's completely out of sight. And there is the termite mound, one of the many termite mounds. And he lays his tools on the ground and uses them one by one. If he wasn't thinking when he sat up and scratched and looked around and then picked those tools, what was he doing? At any rate, I was told that I couldn't talk about that. And I certainly couldn't talk about emotions, happiness, sadness, fear, despair. And it seemed very strange to me because those things were so obvious, not only in chimpanzees, but I'd been taught as a child that animals had personalities. I'd been taught as a child that they have minds and emotions. And the teacher I had who made this so clear to me was a teacher that many of you may know. It was my dog, Rusty. And if you have a dog or a cat, rabbit, horse, pig, I don't care what it is, if you share your life in a meaningful way with an animal, you know perfectly well that they do have personalities, they can think, and they have emotions. So it was thinking about my dog Rusty that enabled me to, you know, stick to my guns when I got to Cambridge and learn how to write about these things without upsetting all my colleagues. At any rate, chimpanzees are like us in so many ways. Biologically, you can look up how like us they are. DNA of human and chimp differs by only just over 1%, and many other biological similarities. The brain is almost the same, it's just that ours is bigger. And they have very complex social life, very complex community. They have these wonderful, long-term, supportive, affectionate bonds between mothers and offspring and between brothers and sisters. We've only just learned that exactly who the fathers are. We never knew before because it's not like a human nuclear family. A female, when she's sexually receptive, may be mated by all the males in her community, so you can never be sure who's daddy. But now you just collect a little sample of feces, sample of poo, send it off to a lab, and they do the DNA profiling, and now finally we know who the fathers are for sure. So we're still learning about these amazing chimpanzees, and let me tell you one story before I move away from them. And it's just, let's imagine now, we're following a young male in his prime. His name is Satan. He's not wicked, but at one point he stole a manuscript my mother was working on. We had to bribe him with a banana to get it back. And anyway, here he is, in his prime, 23 years old, very magnificent, beautiful chimp, going along the valley, and he hears excited calls of chimpanzees feeding in a tree ahead, and he hurries along the trail, his hair bristles, gets to this big tree filled with feeding chimps and ripe fruit, climbs up, and there's some nice ripe figs. He goes straight there, and there's a younger male feeding, but that's okay because Satan is dominant. He threatens the younger male, who's about 3 years younger than he is, and the young male backs off screaming. Satan starts to feed, but what Satan didn't know is that young male's older brother, who's about 2 years older than Satan, he's feeding higher in the tree. Hearing his kid brother in trouble, he swings down, and now the two brothers attack Satan. And Satan screams. To my amazement, a very ancient female who must be at least 50, and chimps can live to be over 60, but her teeth are worn to the gums, she's very frail, her hair is no longer glossy and black but brown, and she drops down through the branches, and with her little hand she starts hitting the two brothers. And I think they're so surprised they stop fighting Satan and mildly threaten her, and Satan gets away, and that was Satan's ancient mother, Sprout. So it's just one of millions of stories I could tell you, but we don't have time. At any rate, because the chimps are so obviously like us in so many ways, it became easier to help people understand there actually isn't a sharp line with humans on the one hand and animals on the other. It's a very blurry line. And we are not the only beings with personalities, minds and feelings, as I was told when I went to Cambridge. And so gradually all around the world people are beginning to realize that animals should have a different way of being thought about. And sadly that hasn't spread nearly far enough. And you can just think around in the things that you know about and some of the ways that animals are treated in a way that you wouldn't want to be treated. And maybe this is something in one of your workshops or back at school, you can talk about it. Talk about the things you know, your experiences, where animals have been treated as inferior, without feelings, without personalities, without minds. How did it all begin? Well, I loved animals when I was a tiny child. I had a wonderful mother, and I was very lucky. Chimpanzees, it's the same. There's good mothers and bad mothers, and it makes a difference for them. And my mother supported my love of animals, and she didn't get mad at me when I disappeared, aged 4.5. We were staying on a farm in the country, and as we lived in the city in London, it was very exciting. And I disappeared, and I'd been hiding in a hen house for over 4 hours apparently, because I couldn't think where the hole was on the hen where the egg came out. And so I was waiting to see. And my mother didn't get mad at me when she saw me, although she was really scared. They even called the police. But she saw my shining eyes and sat down to hear this wonderful story of how a hen lays an egg. And she helped me find books about animals because she knew I'd read better if I was trying to read books about things I was interested in. And I found the books about Dr. Dolittle, and then I found the books about Tarzan of the Apes. No TV when I was your age, by the way. At any rate, I was about 10.5 when I read Tarzan. And of course I fell in love with Tarzan. And what did he do? He married that other stupid wimpy Jane. So I was very jealous. But anyway, that was when my dream began. I would go to Africa, live with animals, and write books about them. I didn't want to be a scientist, I wanted to be a naturalist. And everybody laughed at me because back then World War II was raging. My family didn't have enough money to buy a bicycle, certainly not a car. And Africa was still, we didn't know much about it. It was the dark continent filled with cannibals and poisoned arrows and things like that. And I was a girl. And, you know, girls simply didn't get to do that sort of thing back then. That was for boys. So they laughed at me and told me to dream about something I could achieve, except for my mother. And she would say, if you really want something, and you work hard, and you take advantage of opportunity, and you never give up, you will find a way. That's a message for anyone here who has a dream. Don't give up. Follow your dream, if it's something that really means a lot to you. At any rate, eventually we didn't have money for university. I did a secretarial course because Mum said maybe you can get a job in Africa. And I got invited to Kenya by a school friend. That was the opportunity. Left my job in London, worked as a waitress in a hotel because I had to earn the fare to get out there, and set off when I was 23 by boat to Africa. What an exciting adventure. And that was when I heard about the late Louis Leakey and went and met him at the Natural History Museum. And he took me all around and he asked me hundreds of questions. And because I'd gone on reading about animals in Africa, I could answer most of those questions. And he gave me a job as his secretary. See, Mum was right. And that led to him offering me this opportunity to go and study not just any animal, but the one most like us. How amazing is that? And so, fortunately, he obviously made a good decision, because 50 years later, I'm still learning about these chimpanzees, and the study has never stopped. And there are now similar studies in many other parts of Africa. And of course, we're learning more and more about all sorts of other different animals. But any of you who feel like you need to become field biologists and go and study animals, there's still so much left to learn. Even after 50 years, we're still learning about that one group of chimpanzees.